Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you this morning. If I haven't met you, I look forward to meeting you over the break. We've had a great time over the last 2 days. This is our third day of sharing with you. Yesterday, we had the opportunity, some of the team had the opportunity. We were escorted by the military, which was very nice to be looked after, and we were taken down through the centre of town and where all of the earthquake damage has been, and it was good to be able to see that firsthand. But there's a lot of cleanup that's already taken place, and there's a lot of recovery that's already started. There's some that's going to be delayed because there's a lot of reports and engineering works that have to be done. It's going to take some time, isn't it, to get everything back to normal? It's going to take, maybe some people are saying it might take a few months, some people are saying it might take a couple of years. But can I tell you, one thing is for sure, there is a future and there is an incredible hope. And I sense that in this room today, and I sensed that in this room yesterday, and I've sensed that in the community as I've been talking to people in the street. I've seen lots of smiles in the last few days, which is good. It's a good sign. It's when people can, in the midst of a challenge, still keep smiling. That's a good thing. That means you're going to be okay. And the truth is, you are going to be okay. And whether or not we came to talk to you, you would have been okay. We're not making that much difference. It's good to be here, and I think it is making some help, but I want you to know that you have a lot of strength and you have a lot of capacity. So over the last few days, we have been talking about some major themes. We've been talking about trauma. We've been talking about grief. We've been talking about loss and how we respond to that and how we recover from that. So that's our major theme, and we will be going over that again a little bit today. But what we've tried to do is take that major theme that is the theme of the whole conference, and we've tried to give you some additional information. We've also been really listening to what you've been asking us about. And so this morning, I've actually prepared some specific material in response to the questions I've been asked over the last few days. One of the main questions that I was asked about was, what about our kids? How do we help our kids in trauma? And so I want to look at that from in detail in this first session. And in the second session, I want to talk about the subject of mental health. And so I want to help you understand that a little bit more. Now, both of those subjects are massive subjects that we could spend a whole day or a whole week on. Again, so we're going to sort of do what I called a fly past on some of those. And we're going to have a look at the main ideas to give you some strength, to give you some abilities, so you might be able to help people as we go forward. But I just want to show you a slide that I've shown each day, and it's this question about what is a trauma. So if this is your first time here, I want you to think about this question. If this is your second or third day that you've been with us, I want you to not say, oh, I've seen that one, and just turn your brain off. I want you to think a little bit more deeply about it. I've been studying trauma, not so much like I was in university, but I've been studying trauma through walking with people in trauma for probably the whole of my time as a pastor. I remember the very first time I had a traumatic event that I was asked to come to. It was a 9-year-old child that had contracted a very, very serious blood disorder, and the blood was turning to crystals in his bloodstream. And unfortunately, it was so rare, there was no effective treatment for this. And the child's internal organs were being cut by the crystallization of the blood. And it was a terrible, sad disease. All they could do was keep him comfortable until he died. And that was my first exposure to trauma as a very young pastor. I think I was 23 years old when that happened, and I was the pastor in a church, and I was sitting with this family and trying to understand trauma. And I learned so much from just watching, and I didn't know the answers, but I learned from the experience. And so I think some of us learn from the experiences we've had. And so this experience that you've had with this earthquake, whilst it's a terrible thing, one of the positive things that come out of it is that it is an opportunity for us to individually learn, and it's an opportunity for us as a group to learn from one another how we respond. Now, trauma is an event or circumstance which is perceived as traumatic. So if somebody feels like they've been traumatised, then it is actually a trauma. Now, why do I say that? Every one of us is different. I look different to you. You look different to me. We have a different family of origin. We have different histories that we're living through. We have differences. What you think and what I think might be different. But if I only think something is traumatic, if I think it's traumatic, I won't be soft and helpful to you if you feel something is traumatic. So you might experience something that seems very, very significant. So in our country, a lot of people have pets, okay, so animals, dogs, cats, etc. And those pets, for different people, have different values. Some people consider a pet just an animal that lives near them. It's not very important. It's just they might throw some food to it, they might pat the dog, and they might call it by a name, okay? But they don't really care that much about the dog. They care a bit, but they're not abusive. It's just that's the dog. But for some people, their dog is like a child to them. They carry it round, it has a name. I have seen people recently putting clothes on their dog, dressing their dog up. They take it to the movies with it. They take it to the shopping centre. I saw a man with a dog on his motorcycle the other day. It had a cap on. Dog had a cap on, sitting in front of him on the motorcycle. Some people, that dog is very, very different and important. Now, if I have an attitude which says dogs they're just dogs, but this person says that this dog is a member of their family, and then that dog dies, for me, a dog dying might not be a trauma. But if it's a trauma for that person, if I'm truly going to help them, I need to treat it as if it is a trauma. I can't just push over it and say it's not important. Now, you can apply that to every situation, and you can apply it to this earthquake. For some people, this earthquake, and I'm being respectful here, is old news. Now, it was 6 weeks ago. Yes, it happened. Yes, life's got back to normal. We're moving on. For some people, that is the case. But for some people, this issue is still going on. There are still families who are grieving intensely. There are still businesses that are unable to reopen. There are still buildings that need to be demolished before you can even start to think about what is coming next. And so the understanding of trauma needs to be on what are they experiencing, not what you are experiencing. We need to recognise that trauma is a variable, and we need to be very aware of that trauma. So I also spoke to you about the idea in terms of trauma, that trauma doesn't just affect one person. So some traumas affect just one person. But large traumas, especially like this earthquake, affect a lot of people. So there are the primary victims, the immediate people who are involved, the people who were killed, the people who were injured, the people who have lost houses and lost major infrastructure. Those are the primary victims. Some of you might be among primary victims. But all of the rest of us are in another layer. So some might be family, friends, and first responders. So anyone who responded to the event will have a different picture of the event. So you have the pro-rescue and the pro-med people who went in. You have the police, the VMF. I spoke to both of those groups of people yesterday, and both of them told me stories about how they walked in and had to respond in the immediate first instance. We heard the stories about how the hospital responded and how it was overwhelmed by people rushing to the hospital, and then they had to try to work out who they deal with first. And everybody is so focused on themselves or the person they brought to hospital that there's chaos in these situations. And you need to work out, and the word is triage. You have to work out who you have to deal with first. Because just because you've been there the longest doesn't mean you get help. Because if someone else is going to die, if they don't get help, they get priority. And so, but that is always a very aggressive time in a hospital. And so there's a lot of pain. And so the first responders have to deal with this. Sometimes the first responders, when I've spoken to them, and I said, so how did things go? And in the disaster, they said, well, the disaster wasn't a problem. The people were the problem. I hate people. I had a nurse once say to me, I just hate people now because they're so bad. They're so nasty. They're so mean. They're so they lack understanding. And sometimes after a disaster, the first responders decide they've had enough and they don't want to ever do this again, and they stop being a nurse, or they stop being a paramedic, or they stop being a policeman because of it. And so that's why we focus in on trying to help people in those areas. But even outside of these two circles, we have a third circle. And now this is really starting to incorporate all of us. Anyone who lived in Port Vila was impacted, and so you feel it. We're aware of it. It's a regular topic of conversation. And so there will be various responses. There will be fear responses, there will be joy responses because of the good things which have happened. There will be responses which are questioning responses. All of this will be going on in the whole community. And then you have a wider group, which would include, this is where I sit. I'm in the green zone outside of, I wasn't here on the 17th of December. I'm not a family member or a friend, first responder. I'm not in that group. I'm not a community member, although I feel like I am now because I've been enjoying my time here with you. But I'm someone else who has an interest. And so it's really important to recognise the single few moments. I was told yesterday the earthquake lasted somewhere around 18 to 20 seconds. That was the time that the earthquake actually lasted. Now, a lot of shaking and things went on after that because of just buildings moving, but the actual tremor lasted 18 to 20 seconds. That moment, those concentric circles, we're still talking about it 6 weeks, and we will be talking about it probably for a few years. It'll be an important thing. And this is what happens, and so many people are affected. But one of the things we haven't touched on is, and a question that was asked to me on the first day and then again yesterday, was what about the children? What do we do with children specifically? And so I want us to look at this idea of childhood trauma. Now this is a picture of a girl from Haiti, and this was after the earthquake in Haiti, and a very similar scenario to the earthquake in Vanuatu. Houses were lost, major infrastructure was lost, buildings were lost, and the buildings suffered, many of the buildings that fell suffered for the same reason that many of the buildings fell here or have been severely compromised, and it's because of variable building codes and just where you happen to be. So it's a very similar sort of scenario. And so Children are members of the community. Children could be primary victims. Children could be members of the family, they could be members of the community, or they could be even outside further. And we're all worried about children. We all want to make sure children are safe. I think everyone agrees that kids are wonderful. As Pastor Ann said, I have 3 grandchildren. I've got 4 children, but they're all adult children now. My youngest child is 26. But now I have 3 grandchildren, and I have 1 more that is due in 6 weeks' time. So the 4th grandchild is due, and it's good to be a grandparent. I do enjoy being a grandparent. But I'll tell you something, I would do everything I possibly could to protect my children and to protect my grandchildren. It's very important to me. So this subject is actually very close to my heart because I know kids, and I think it's important for us to understand what's going on for kids. So children will have varied responses to trauma. You can't just say, this is how children will respond to trauma, because kids are so different. Kids are so different. Each one of my children, totally different from the others. They have some things that look the same. I've noticed they walk the same. They have I can see them from far away, and they walk in the same way that I do, and that's okay. That's fine. I can recognise it. But apart from that, they're very different. Some are very academic. Some are very practical. They have different emotional responses. They do different things, and that's been always the case. And so it'd be really crazy to think that every child is going to respond the same way to trauma, because it's not what's going to happen. Each child is going to be different. Some children will have a very, very simple response. They'll look at it, they'll nod, they'll see it, they'll take it on, they may be sad for a few moments, and then they'll move past it and they'll never mention it again. Others will see the same thing and they will have a very, very frightened, concerned response, and we need to work with kids wherever they find themselves. The one thing you don't want to do is you don't want to project an expected response upon your kids. So if you've got children or grandchildren, I don't want you to go away from here saying, oh, now I have to go and ask them about the trauma. Okay? Big lesson. Let the children lead you in what you do. And if there's nothing showing up, relax. It's not a problem. Not everyone needs to respond to trauma, and children don't have to respond to trauma. So it will be varied according to their age and the level of their exposure. So if a child was right there in a house and the earthquake happened and the shelves, all the things on the shelves fell off in the house and the house broke down, etc., that child is going to have a larger response to one that just maybe didn't even really notice that there was a tremor. Just was, oh, what's happening? It's a bit strange, and they might have moved straight past it. Yes, question.
So what would you say? How would you know if the child is like pushing down and like how to communicate?
Yep.
How does pushing one be reflecting on the page?
Sure.
How do you know if they're like?
How do you know they're doing it? So hang in there with me for a minute, and I'm going to get there. Promise. So, life-threatening events such as car accidents, natural disasters, sudden illnesses, traumatic deaths, crime, abuse, violence in the community can all instill a trauma. Okay, so kids could be traumatised by any one of these things. So the same way an adult can be traumatised, a child could be traumatised. But what we have here is the ideas that are important to recognise is that kids, especially preschoolers, they don't necessarily have the language to express themselves. They can't talk about the stuff because they don't know what to say. They may not have the words to communicate what they feel. So it's important that we look for some other clues. And in answer to the question I've just been given, the fact is there will be some clues that something is happening. And so as we work through this, just start to think, well, what might that look like and how might it outplay to see if trauma has actually had an effect on them. All right. Now, just a reminder that if you would like a copy of our notes, we are happy to send you a PDF of all of the training we've done over the 3 days. So you just give us your email address on a piece of paper, just pop it up here or give it to Kathy at the back there, and we'll make sure that when we get back to Australia, we send all of you a copy of the notes. But please feel free to take photos of any of the slides, and it's good to take notes because it triggers your memory anyway. All right, so preschoolers and older children know when something is not right. Now, they have an inherent understanding of something that's not going wrong. So people sometimes try to shield and hide trauma from kids. Now, I want to be really careful here. I don't think we should go out of our way to expose children to trauma. Okay? We don't expose kids to trauma. So there's no value in saying, I'm going to take you downtown and show you the devastation. There's no value in that whatsoever. Okay? But if they have seen the trauma, there is no value in trying to hide them from the trauma either. So we don't have to expose them to it, but we don't want to hide them from it. We just need to be normal. So just be calm and be normal around this. So they don't understand what's gone wrong, but they're sensitive to things not being right. And if you don't talk about it at all, they will think it's worse than it is. They will assume it's really bad, and the fact that there's no normalising or helping happening, they will actually think it's even worse. So the best thing you can do is to be honest and open, but simple with them, not too graphic. So if someone died, maybe you need to say to that child, if they ask what's happened to Uncle John, you need to say, very sad, he has died. But you don't need to say how he died. You don't need to go into the graphic details of him experiencing the issue of what's happened in the earthquake or the building collapsing. They don't need to go too far. You just need to be simple and calm and demonstrate your own feelings, and that is what the child is looking for. A child's response to a distressing or frightening experience will depend on their age, where they are in their development and their personality, as well as the impact that it's had upon the parents. So if the parents are very, very traumatised, the child is likely to be more traumatised. But if the parents are careful and wise in their response, they should see that in the kids, most of the time, there won't be too much of a problem. Your child may not react, though, in the ways you expect. They might react slightly differently. And that's something that I'm going to go into now. Right, so I'm very happy to take any questions as we go through here, so please feel free to jump in and ask a question. It's not going to bother me at all. But I do want to just try to give you what to look for in the actions and activities of the kids. So here are some signs of emotional trauma. There's quite a few there, and I've got a couple of other slides as well. But in the main understanding, you will have emotional, behavioural signs, cognitive signs. Cognitive means thinking. It's the way the brain is working. There will be physical signs, so what's happening in their body, and there will be behavioural signs. So let's unpack some of these. So in terms of emotions, what's actually going on emotionally for the person, you will have the child might be extra anxious. So the child might be nervous. The child might be expressing things like, oh, is there going to be another earthquake today, mummy? Is there going, I'm frightened because there might be a shock today. I'm frightened because I don't want to die. They might be talking about things. They might be expressing that sort of thing, and that's a dangerous. That's a concerning thing for parents. They might be really, really sad and have a depression where they've got a sadness that won't go away. They're normally a very, very happy child, but they're now no longer a happy child. They might have anger and aggression. A child that normally isn't angry might be a bit more angry. Or they might be irritable and have mood swings. The cognitive signs, they might not be able to concentrate on what they're doing. So they might be, when they go back to school, after school holidays, they might find that the child is a bit distracted. They might be disoriented, or they might not have the ability to make good decisions, or they might even have a negative self-perception. In terms of physical signs, they might have sleep disturbances. So they normally would sleep well, but now they're waking up at night, and that will often be attached to nightmares or things like that. They might have chronic pain or somatic complaints. What somatic means is it's the feelings. You will have just strange feelings and strange responses in your body, and your body will feel weird because it's just you don't know why, but often your emotions can actually push onto you and can end up being out. You can have aches and pains in your arms and legs. You think, what is that? And it's not because of anything physical, it's because of the emotion that is trying to find a way out, and it outworks in musculature. And then you've got headaches, stomach aches, so you can have an upset stomach. A lot of people who have, an upset tummy, diarrhea and things like that can often be not just about something they have eaten or an illness, it can be because of the anxiety, it's the churning up that's going on. And sometimes this really affects children. You can have excessive bedwetting, or they can have accidents with the toilet. Various experiences can happen. It could be simple signs. Again, I don't want to make you frightened. Don't worry. All of this is normal. Okay, this is okay. And the reality is it will pass if the child is just given some support. But I want you to be aware that sometimes we're frightened of things we don't understand. And so it's good to understand them a little bit more. They may lead in older children to even an eating disorder, but that's unlikely in the situation that we're in here. But then you've got behavioural and relationship signs. You might find a child withdrawing. You might find a child having difficulty trusting others. When normally they would go with the other children, they might not want to go with the other children. They might not be comfortable leaving their parents for a while. This is very common after a disaster. They want to just be close to mum and dad. They don't want you, oh, where are you going? And there'll be this fear, just this response. And that's all normal. And then so this is the attachment issues. They very, very strongly attach to the parents, and that's okay for a while, but it's not going to be okay forever. You can't always have your child with you, so there's a moment we have to work through that. All right, so there's some of the signs. Are there any questions on any of those? I've talked a lot so far. Everyone all right? Please. Yes. No. So it's not a short-term thing, and so a lot of these situations are. I'm taking this from any sort of childhood trauma. If it's untreated, unhelped, later in life, it can come back and be a problem. And so that would be one of those. An eating disorder would be some childhood trauma sometimes that has not been assisted or not been helped in some way. So I'm not suggesting that if a child experiences an earthquake, they're going to be anorexic. That's not what I'm saying. But if the child experiences a deep trauma in their life and it's not helped, one of the ways sometimes people process trauma is by experiencing anxiety, and one of the anxiety responses can be an eating disorder, self-image problem. Okay?
For a lot of these signs, do you think that they come immediately or after a few weeks, months?
So you'll find that the immediate response will be probably a little bit of a change of behaviour. And if it's not assisted or not managed well, some of these might be longer term effects. So it's not so much that this is going to happen in the next few weeks, but some of these will happen in very, very small ways. All right, now, let me go on a little bit. So there's another description of that is called ACE. It's Adverse Childhood Experiences. So the signs that a child has had an adverse childhood experience can include, now it says can, all right? Not every child that has a negative experience will experience all of these, but it might be there. So they might have a fear of other people. Can I just speak to a situation that happened in my family on this one? COVID-19. My second grandchild was born just at the beginning of COVID, right at the beginning of COVID. And for the first 18 months, the whole 18 months of COVID went right the way through his first 18 months of development, pretty much either under lockdown or under very, very minimal connection with people. So he never played with other children. He never did play dates, never did the going to the park sort of thing, because he had time with his parents and he had time with us, but he didn't have time with many others. Now, interestingly, he's completely fine now, he's 5 years old, but at the time, he was a little less well adapted to meeting new people. He was a little bit more fearful of meeting people because he wasn't exposed to it. So over time, he has now been socialised and he's caught up. That's no problem at all. But that was an illustration. So an adverse childhood experience, growing up as a baby through COVID and walking through COVID, actually had led a little bit to a fear of other people, which is fine. Now, he might always be a little bit hesitant just because of that, but he's not got an ongoing problem with it. So this is the way we need to look at it. It's not bad news, it's just news to help you understand. So they might have difficulty sleeping, or they might have frequent nightmares. They might have difficulty showing attention or affection, They might have difficulty learning in school. Bedwetting might be an issue. There might be changes to their mood, or they might be avoiding situations or events that might relate to a traumatic experience. I had a child who was caught in a storm in their boat. Now, I lived near a river, and the people I was working with had a boat, and on this particular day, the motor on their boat broke down, and they were trying to get home, and while they were getting home, a storm rose, quite a big storm. And the boat didn't get blown over, but it got filled with water, and the child was sitting in the back of the boat, had his light on, and it was just a very, very traumatic experience. 5 years old, and they just felt like they were going to die. Now, for many years afterwards, that child struggled whenever there was rain, whenever there was lightning, whenever there was wind blowing in the trees. You could see that child would have an emotional and a mental cognitive response that was a fear response, and you'd see them contract, you'd see them pull away. So they would never leave the house when it was going to rain. They would never want to go to school when there was a possibility of a storm. And so that person Their family realised the child had developed a bit of a problem, and they went and got some help. And there is help, and that person was fine afterwards. But sometimes there can be something that can be leaving a response in people. All right, so children's responses to trauma can vary, but these are some of the common reactions that you might find following the earthquake. You might find that the children in your world might be a little bit more clingy. What I mean by that is they want to be near mum and dad a little bit more. That's okay. There's not a problem. Parents love their children. That's a good thing. We don't mind if the children cuddle up. I would like my children to want to cuddle me. It'd be nice, but they don't anymore because they're too old. But it's nice to have the children close. That's all right. But they might follow the parent around the house, and you're wondering, why are they following me? Why are they following me? It might be because they've just got a little bit of a low-level disquiet. They just feel better if they can see who you are and where you are. There might be some new problems with their basic skills, as I've already mentioned. They might be sleeping badly. They might not be sleeping well anymore. They're getting interrupted, or they might be coming in to bother you in the middle of the night saying they're frightened. They might be having trouble going to the toilet, or they might be going to the toilet a lot, or they might have trouble paying attention. It might even seem like they've slipped back in their age, or regressed is the term, to a younger state. So a 5-year-old might have been learning to be very independent, but after the earthquake, they're suddenly very dependent again. It's like they've gone back a step. Don't worry, it's normal. Give them the care they need, give them the support they need. They will most likely improve. So the support is basically just being aware of the signs and providing them love and security. And I've got a list which I'm going to get to, but the reality is it's not a clinical response. We don't have to get professional help until, now there might be a point where we need professional, it's a real problem that keeps going, but the most important thing is that we can actually help our kids just by being good parents at this point. So there's stuff we can do. Now, there might be mood changes. The child might not seem to enjoy the daily routines that they normally like, or activities they used to do. They might seem more shut down. They might be listless, so without energy, and withdrawn. They might have changes in their behaviour. They might be more aggressive or angry, and that's kind of hard as well. Or they might be showing increased fear. The child may be more jumpy or startled or frightened. I came out of here yesterday and there was a young lady standing out there and she didn't see me come outside the door, and I walked past her and she screamed because she wasn't expecting anyone to be there. She was very jumpy. I don't think it was because of the earthquake. It was just because there was this big white man behind her suddenly and she was frightened of me. That was fine. So, but you know how some people can be jumpy. That's fine. But that can also be that the child is feeling a nervous energy and they don't know what's going to happen. So take a photo of that because I want to show you the next one. If you want to grab that, that's all that's coming up on that slide. There's some more reactions I want to just add to that. All right, so keeping going with this, they might be having more nightmares than normal. Now, kids have nightmares. Sometimes it's because they ate too late. Sometimes it's because they saw something on a screen that was frightening, or they heard a story, or their imagination's rolling. That's all normal, that's fine. But after an earthquake, maybe they might be having nightmares because of what they've experienced. Talking about the frightening event more. They may want to talk about it, and they keep talking about it, and you think, oh wow, that's really odd. I've spoken about this, and they still keep coming back to me. I had someone yesterday say, oh, but I've spoken to them about the trauma, but they keep bringing it up. Can I encourage you that that's actually normal? They're trying to see if the answer changes. Because they believe the answer you've given them, but they're just testing to see whether the answer... It's something about reassurance. Sometimes we need to hear things more than once. It's why it's important to express your love for each other regularly. It's not that anything has changed. Like I told my wife I loved her when we got married, but I've been married for 40 years and I still tell her each day I love her. It's not that she forgets it. It's that it's just good to remember it. It's good to remind us that this isn't changing. This is actually going on. And so we can do that. Not seeming to be reassured is what I'm talking about. They keep talking about it again and again. Sometimes being scared that the trauma will happen again. What if there's another earthquake, Dad? What if there's another earthquake tonight, Dad? And that is a fear response which needs to be answered with confidence. Now, I know that on one level, an earthquake could happen. On one level, it could. But the reality is the chances are extraordinarily minimal that it will. And I think we need to be positive with children to give them confidence until they can process it cognitively. And I don't think you're doing anything wrong by telling the kids that they're safe. They want to feel safe. And you're going to do everything you can to keep them safe anyway. Now, they might also start to be frightened of other things that they were never frightened of before. And this is the way anxiety works. So in the next session, I'll talk about this, how anxiety grows. But they might start being afraid of dogs, strangers, being apart. It could grow and it could keep going forward on that. Now, they might also have more physical complaints, like tummy aches, headaches, being tired, or having other problems. And the last thing, very interestingly, they might even blame themselves. Now, they may not blame themselves that they caused the earthquake, but they may blame themselves in other traumas, or they may even blame themselves for something that's going on. It was because I was bad. Our house got knocked over because I was bad, because I did something wrong. All right, so these actions, the ones on the previous page, and these ones are the normal children's responses. So these are common reactions. Now, I know some of those might feel a little bit scary for you as a parent. You think, oh, wow, what am I going to do to fix this? Right? Can I tell you, don't be worried, because the solution is actually, in some ways, I think quite easy, okay? But there is an option also for if it gets a little bit more complex. All right, so what can you do? What can you do to assist people assist children getting through and experiencing these childhood traumas? Right, now the first thing is interesting. It is seek, accept, and increase support for yourself. Now, I think most people would have been on an aeroplane. Who's been on an aeroplane before? You know, you've been on an aeroplane, lots of people? A lot of people. So one of the things that happen when you get on an aeroplane is there is a safety briefing, okay, just before the aircraft takes off. And one of the things they tell you is to put your seatbelt on, and how to use your life jacket. But then they talk about the air mask, the oxygen mask. And the one thing they say is, if there's a problem, the oxygen mask will come down. And what do they tell you to do? They say, put it on yourself first before you help other people. Especially if you've got children, put it on yourself. Because the purpose of this is, if you don't and you help someone else, you might end up not being able to breathe properly and you might pass out, and that's not helpful. So you need to look after yourself first. This is what this is about. The best thing you can do to help your children recover is to make sure you've got all the support you need. Are you feeling okay? Because children pick up on things. Children will know when you're happy, they'll know when you're sad, they'll know when you're angry, they'll know when you're frustrated, and they'll know when you are afraid. They will pick up on it. So if you are showing all of those emotions, the child is going to mirror those emotions. They are going to feel unsafe. And because you're not safe, you're not feeling safe, they don't feel safe, and that will make things worse. So look after yourself first. So manage your own shock, your emotional response, talk to someone, get into a position where you are comfortable. Stay calm. And I know that's really difficult, especially in the emergency. It's hard to stay calm. But now the tremor has stopped, the earthquake has stopped. Be calm. Talk in a normal way. Tell the children, reassure them it's going to be okay. Listen to the child and tolerate. Let them tell you about the earthquake. Now, some children will want to tell you the same story 10 times. It's not a problem. They're reprocessing it. One of the things you do in counselling with people is you let them tell their story again and again and again so that they can change their response to the story. And over time, the more you tell the story, the less emotional power it has. If it's tolerated and it's allowed, and slowly it begins to fade. And that is a beautiful thing. You need to reassure the child that this event is over. Can I encourage you to actually use that? You say, yeah, earthquake's finished now. It's not happening now. We don't have to worry about that. That was a moment time. Now we are past that moment. That will, over a period of a few days, if you talk to the childlike way, that will actually reassure them, even though you might have to reassure them more than once, that they are safe. And slowly but surely, they will start to smile, they will feel better, they'll feel secure, and they'll be able to move forward in a positive way. Now, when they are, ask them what they are thinking about the event. Now, realise that some children, very young children, will only want to talk about this for a very short period of time. And sometimes parents make the mistake, they try to get more out of the child. So they'll ask them 20 questions trying to get them to have a deep conversation about it. But actually, the younger the child is, the shorter the conversation might be. Oh yes, I was very scared while the earthquake happened, but it stopped now. That might be all of the processing a 2 or 3-year-old want to have with you. I was very frightened. That's good, they've processed it. But a 10-year-old might want to talk about what they know about earthquakes. They might want to understand that, oh, did you see what happened down at the Billabong, Dad? Oh, it's terrible. What happens? How do they get the bodies out, Dad? They might want to talk about details, and that's okay. You've got to work with them according to what they are going to actually ask and reassure them, because sometimes you can correct mistakes. You know, they think that everyone who was in the building died. No, only this happened. It's sometimes just giving them clear facts and clear understanding, simple but not gruesome, is really helpful. It helps them, they start to work through the process and understand what may be taking place. Explain to them how they were kept safe. So, you know, when the earthquake happened, the first thing your mum did was she ran into your room and grabbed hold of you. And she ran outside. It was so good because we are so focused on looking after you. It's actually great when they realise there was a problem, but there was an answer. The answer was that they were kept safe. They were encouraged. And if it was a frightening story, there was a little bit of doubt and fear in there, just you can go through that story with them and reassure them that one of the key things that was they were focusing on was keeping that child safe and giving them a sense of value so you could protect them from happening again. All right. So everyone got that? I'll move on. There's a couple of other things you can keep doing as well. Children will have fears, and sometimes they have fears, and we need to give them time to learn how to cope with those fears. It's important to acknowledge and validate the concerns that they are experiencing. Okay, so what that means is you say, yes, that is a real thing. That's okay. That's a real fear, and it's all right that you're feeling like that. It's telling them they're normal. It's expressing to them that they're not strange. Again, just look at the person next to you and say, hey, you're really normal. Okay, just look at them and just say that, because some of you are looking at the person and you're wondering whether you can say that. No, that's fine. Now, this is a really important one. Okay? Can I encourage you to be really careful with your children not to re-expose them to more than they need to be exposed to? Social media is a wonderful thing and it's a terrible thing. Okay? The news is a wonderful thing and it's a terrible thing. In a lot of disaster settings, we have in Australia recovery centres set up. So they are community halls like this would be transferred into recovery centres so people can have somewhere to sleep for the first night until they can be found permanent accommodation. In one of those recovery centres recently, there was a large television like this one. It was during the bushfires. It was a few years ago. During the bushfires, and I was attending as the chaplain at that recovery centre. And on the screen, permanently, was the news feed of what was happening with the bushfires. And I looked up and I saw a whole crowd of people standing around the television, watching as one of the houses of the people in the recovery centre burnt down. And so it was exposing them to trauma. And then for the rest of the day, that footage kept showing up again and because it was a really good piece of footage from the news taker's perspective. But it was actually re-traumatising the adults. Now, for children, yes, there was an earthquake on the 17th of December. Yes, people were killed. Yes, that. But you don't need to take them back home to show them. You don't need to let them watch it on social media again and again and again. They don't need to watch the news. Can I encourage you to limit the exposure of your children? Because the more they see, the more it will build up. What they need is confidence. What they need is help. What they need is a sense that things are going to be okay. And so you can do that. All right, so sometimes the child will have some strong feelings and we need to accept those strong feelings and and help the child to name the strong feelings. So they're saying, well, what are you feeling? I'm feeling frightened. That's okay. It's good if they put a name to it. Fright will come and go, will ebb and flow. And so it's important that they're able to name the feelings. These might be brief conversations. Remember, children, especially children at a young age, can't talk about these experiences for long. And so it might be just a 20-second conversation or a 30-second conversation, and that's okay. And if you are consistent, if you follow it through, they will be okay. And lastly on this, understand that a child may act in a more babyish way and make allowances for this. It's okay for a child to take a step back for a bit. They will step forward again, but it's okay if they step backwards for a little bit. All right, are there any questions on any of that, what you can do stuff? Don't apologise.
So you told me before about how it's important to know first children will not have this first will not to know this like it's that they are
So the balance is what they have experienced, they need explanation for. But they don't need experience beyond that they don't need to completely understand everything about earthquakes. They don't need to, now they might be interested. If a child is particularly interested, how does an earthquake happen? That might be useful information. It might be useful information to point out that the last earthquake was 70 years ago. It's a long time between them. That sort of information might be helpful. But I wouldn't be trying to upload that to every child. So I think it's a case of over-servicing, giving them too much can actually make things worse, is what I'm saying. So give them enough so that they're comfortable, and when they smile and say, yes, that's okay, you move on. I'll tell you a funny story of this. I hope this will make you laugh. It made me laugh. A child asked his father, Daddy, where did I come from? Okay, so he asked the question, where did I come from? And so the father thought it was time for the sex talk. Okay, he thought it's the right time for the sex talk. So he goes into detailed graphs and talking about, this is what happens and this is what takes place. And the child's eyes are getting wider and wider. And he said, wow, Peter comes from Canada. Okay. So what I mean is that he was asking where he comes from, as in what town he came from. The father thought he was asking the sex talk, and so he gives him the sex talk. But he wasn't asking the sex question. He got a lot more than he asked for. Sometimes this is the problem. We can ask for too much. We think they're asking for something else, when actually they might say, yeah, the shaking. So is the earthquake over? And you think, okay, well, now I need to give a big conversation about earthquakes. No, sometimes the answer is yes.
So you would say in protocol of like how the child is saying sometimes the child will talk that people die and ask specific questions.
Mm-hmm.
So then would you then say that if the child is a very serious child that is asking for questions,
Yep.
would you share this detail?
Yeah, so if a child asks me, so did people die? I said, yes, it's very sad. Some people did die. And I would leave that as a simple answer. And if they asked another question, give them another simple answer. I would go as far as they were going, and I might then ask them, how are you feeling about that? And get a little feedback on how they're feeling. But I wouldn't be trying to unpack it in great detail. They don't need to know that this many people died, or this is how they died, or the horror stories. They don't need that. Great. Good. Question over here, yes?
It's not a question, but yes, thank you. It's not a question, but I just want to help you with something you just say now.
Yeah.
About the kids. Yeah, I was when we were at Y1 base in North Nevada, and the earthquake was coming. Like my son was about 9 years old, and the earthquake was finished, but he's still scared. So he slept with me for 1 week because he's still scared of the earthquake. Eh? So one thing that I found out that to help the kids is you gather the kids together to make them not too scared. Yeah, thank you.
That's great. And so that achieved a lot of things. Number one, it said you were interested. It said you were there for them. You got them cuddling together. There was that sense of togetherness. They feel safe. Now then, they've moved back to their beds now, have they? Yeah. Yeah, and that's fine, and that's great, and that's a great illustration. Sometimes it doesn't need to be any more than that, but people are often worried that we have to make more of trauma than we do. Right, excellent, great. So, I'm going to give you a break now, but just before I do, I want you to look at this picture. This is a picture from somewhere in Vanuatu. And I want you to recognise that children take a picture with their eyes. They see something. But over time, if that picture is not reinforced, It's not just keeps coming up. So if you take a picture and you put it on the wall and you leave it on the wall every day, that child is always going to remember that picture. But if this is one moment in time and you don't focus on that moment, what will happen for the child is that picture will start to fade. That picture will actually start to fade. They can remember it, but it's not so clear. You think of some of the things that have happened to you as a child. Maybe there were some sad things that happened, and if I ask you, you could, if I really try hard, I can bring them back. This earthquake is going to be like that for your children. Okay? It will be a fading memory. And so eventually, it will be like that. It'll just be a faded picture. Oh yeah, that happened. That happened. I remember the earthquake happened. It was sad, and I learned from it, but it happened. It faded. That's good. That's what we want. We don't want to ignore it. We don't want to say it didn't happen. We just want it to fade. And the best way you can do that is by what we've been talking about. So the reality is the vast majority of children will recover from being exposed to trauma if they're given love and support and time. That's all they need, love and support and time. The image will fade. All right. Last thing, when you should seek help. Now, give the children time to recover. The only time you actually need to seek further help is if you're concerned or unsure that the child is not coping. So they're not, after a little bit of time, getting better, reach out and get some help. If you're not coping, if you can't help anyone if you're not coping, so you need to get some help. If the child has lots of symptoms and things aren't improving, that's when you would get some help. Or if the household that has experienced a significant loss and all of the community is disrupted, I'd be leaning forward to get help. And if several family members are affected and there doesn't seem to be enough help or attention to go around, or if the family is struggling to re-establish any kind of routine. So if your family is so destabilised by this that you have no normal routine, then maybe you need to reach out for some help. But most of the time you won't need to get help. The image will fade. But if you do need help, you need to reach out. Now, who do you reach out to help for? Maybe you need to reach out to a medical doctor as the first point. They will be able to point you in the right direction for some other help. Maybe there are some recovery agencies that are offering specific help during this time. Maybe you could see a counsellor if you needed to, but only if. You don't have to do this for every child. It's only if there is an ongoing problem with a child. You need to explore what those helps might be, and you need to just make yourself aware of them, but also to not be frightened to ask for help, because asking for help is actually an important activity and it's an adult response. And you can ask for help where your child might not be able to ask for help. All right, are there any questions? That's the finish of what I wanted to talk about. Are there any questions on childhoods, trauma? It's a bit of an overview. I hope that's been helpful. Wonderful, no questions. That means it was either great or it was terrible and you just want me to stop. One of those two, and I'm going to choose the first one. That's great. So why don't we take a half-hour break? We'll come back at, I'll call you back at about 20 minutes to 11. Fantastic. Thank you.